Fear doesn't need color to leave a mark. In the absence of a full spectrum, horror can rely on the power of a silhouette, the depth of the shadow, and the stark contrast between light and total darkness. It's a visual language that forces us to focus on the grain, the texture, and the unsettling geometry of the frame. Tonight, we're tracing a century of darkness. This isn't just a look back at the origins of the genre, it's an exploration of how black and white filmmaking has remained a deliberate, stylistic choice for over 100 years. From the jagged, expressionist nightmares of the silent era to the gritty, transgressive underground of the 90s and the modern prestige of the present day, we're looking at how the removal of color can make a film feel more like a fever dream and less like reality. This is 100 years of black and white horror.
The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, 1920. One of the most influential horror films ever made starts here, in twisted sets and painted shadows. Directed by Robert Wiene, this German expressionist landmark follows a mysterious hypnotist who arrives at a carnival with a sleepwalking performer who can supposedly predict the future. When a series of deaths follows, suspicion turns toward the strange doctor and his silent assistant. The film is famous for its jagged, distorted backdrops and unnatural angles, designed to reflect psychological instability rather than reality. Instead of realism, every frame feels like a nightmare illustration brought to life. Its bold production design changed how filmmakers used visual space to express emotion and fear. The framing story and psychological perspective also helped establish early twist-driven storytelling in cinema. More than a century later, it still feels eerie, theatrical, and deliberately off-balance. Häxan, 1922. Part documentary, part horror dramatization, this unusual film explores the history of witchcraft and superstition through staged scenes and scholarly commentary. Directed by Benjamin Christensen, it recreates medieval beliefs about demons, possession, and ritual practices with elaborate effects for its time. The imagery includes devils, sabbaths, and visions of torment that were considered shocking on release and still feel bold today. It moves between lecture-style explanation and surreal visual storytelling, creating a structure that feels decades ahead of its era. The film blends education and horror in a way that still feels experimental. Because of its structure and graphic imagery, it faced censorship and restricted releases in multiple countries. Modern viewers often see it as both film history and proto-horror spectacle. It stands as one of the strangest and most ambitious dark films of the silent period. Nosferatu, 1922. This unauthorized adaptation of Dracula became one of the defining images of early horror. Directed by F.W. Murnau, the film follows a real estate agent who travels to a remote castle to meet a strange nobleman, Count Orlok, and discovers something unnatural waiting there. Max Schreck's performance as the gaunt, rat-like vampire created a completely different screen monster than the suave versions that followed. The use of shadows, negative space, and real locations gives the film a cold, plague-like atmosphere. The vampire is presented less as a romantic figure and more as a spreading curse. Legal action nearly wiped the film out, which makes its survival even more remarkable. Its visual language, especially the creeping shadow imagery, became foundational for horror cinematography. This is where cinematic vampires truly took shape on screen. The Phantom of the Opera, 1925. Lon Chaney's transformation into the masked figure beneath the Paris Opera House became one of silent cinema's most famous character creations. Directed by Rupert Julian, the film tells the story of a disfigured musical genius who secretly controls the opera from underground passages while obsessing over a young singer he wants to turn into a star. Chaney designed and applied his own makeup, and the reveal of his face reportedly stunned early audiences. The performance relies heavily on physical acting and expressive movement rather than dialogue. Large sets and elaborate staging give the production a grand scale that stands out even among silent-era spectacles. The mix of romance, tragedy, and menace helped define the horror melodrama template. Multiple versions and restorations exist, keeping the film alive across generations. It remains one of the most iconic character-driven horror stories of early cinema. Metropolis, 1927. A towering early science fiction epic from director Fritz Lang, this film presents a futuristic city divided between wealthy planners above ground and exploited workers below. When the son of the city's ruler discovers the harsh conditions beneath the surface, conflict begins to build between the classes. The film is known for its massive sets, miniatures, and groundbreaking visual effects work. Its cityscapes and machine imagery shaped the visual language of science fiction for decades. A robotic double created by a scientist becomes one of the film's most famous elements and a lasting genre icon. The story mixes political allegory with spectacle and human drama. Despite heavy editing in early releases, later restorations recovered much of its intended structure. Even viewers who have never seen the full film usually recognize its imagery and influence. The Man Who Laughs, 1928. A silent horror drama with one of the most haunting faces in early cinema centers on a man permanently disfigured with a carved, frozen grin. Directed by Paul Lenny, the story follows Gwynplaine, who was mutilated as a child and grows up to become a traveling performer, hiding deep emotional pain behind a permanent smile. Conrad Veidt's performance relies entirely on physical expression and posture, creating sympathy and unease at the same time. The film blends gothic atmosphere with tragic romance and social cruelty. Its visual style carries strong German expressionist influence into late silent-era filmmaking. The exaggerated grin design later became a major visual inspiration for comic book villain imagery. Though not a traditional monster film, its tone and character design firmly place it in early horror history. Dracula, 1931. This early sound-era horror classic helped define the screen vampire for generations. Directed by Todd Browning, the film stars Bela Lugosi as Count Dracula, bringing a theatrical, aristocratic presence to the role. The story follows the Count's arrival in England and the growing threat he poses to a small circle of victims and investigators. Lugosi's voice, posture, and deliberate delivery became inseparable from the character's popular image. The film relies more on mood and performance than visual effects, using silence and staging to build tension. It was one of Universal's first major horror hits and helped launch their monster cycle of the 1930s. Its success proved horror could thrive in the new sound format. The character's cape, accent, and hypnotic stare largely come from this portrayal. Frankenstein, 1931. One of the most recognizable horror films ever made, brings the reanimated creature to the screen with lasting impact. Directed by James Whale, the film follows a scientist who assembles a body from stolen parts and brings it to life through an experimental procedure. Boris Karloff's portrayal of the creature emphasizes confusion and vulnerability as much as menace. The laboratory sequence, with towering equipment and electrical effects, became a template for mad science imagery. The creature's flat head and heavy boots come from this film's makeup and costume design. Rather than pure evil, the story presents tragedy driven by rejection and fear. It became a major success for Universal and cemented the studio's horror legacy. The visual look of the creature remains the most recognized version worldwide. Freaks, 1932. This controversial horror drama is known as much for its casting as its story. Directed by Todd Browning, the film centers on a traveling circus sideshow and the performers who live and work there. Many roles were played by real sideshow artists, which gave the production an unusual level of authenticity. The plot follows a cruel scheme against one of the performers that leads to collective revenge. Its sympathetic portrayal of the troupe contrasted sharply with audience expectations at the time. The film faced censorship cuts and was heavily restricted after release. Over time, it was reevaluated and gained cult status. Today, it is considered one of the boldest and most unusual studio horror films of its era. Island of Lost Souls, 1932. After being shipwrecked, Edward Parker finds himself stranded on a remote tropical island ruled by the visionary and sadistic Dr. Moreau. Parker soon discovers that Moreau is conducting agonizing biological experiments in his House of Pain, attempting to accelerate evolution by transforming animals into human-like hybrids. The atmosphere is thick with a primal, uneasy tension as the creatures struggle between their newfound human intellect and their suppressed animal instincts, bound only by Moreau's tyrannical law. Charles Laughton delivers a chilling, sophisticated performance as Moreau, portraying him not as a manic, mad scientist, but as a calm, whip-cracking colonialist who views himself as a god. Opposite him, Bela Lugosi appears in heavy prosthetics as the Sayer of the Law, the tragic leader of the Beastmen who recites the haunting litany of forbidden behaviors. The film's makeup effects were decades ahead of their time, creating a diverse gallery of grotesque, soulful monsters that evoke more pity than revulsion. Director Early C. Kenton utilizes the lush, claustrophobic jungle setting to emphasize the film's themes of de-evolution and moral rot. Unlike many of its contemporaries, Island of Lost Souls feels surprisingly modern in its brutality and frank exploration of vivisection and man playing God. It remains a masterpiece of pre-code horror, offering a grim, visceral experience that questions the thin line separating humanity from the beasts. The Mummy, 1932. When an archaeological expedition accidentally awakens the mummified high priest Imhotep, the ancient Egyptian escapes into the modern world. 10 years later, posing as the mysterious Ardeth Bey, he attempts to resurrect his lost love, Princess Ankh-Su-Namun, believing she has been reincarnated as a young socialite. Unlike later shuffling monster iterations, this original is a sophisticated, slow-burn tale of occult obsession and reincarnation. Director Karl Freund, the legendary cinematographer of Metropolis and Dracula, brings a profound German expressionist influence to his directorial debut. The film uses high-contrast light and shadow to create a sense of ancient, creeping dread. Boris Karloff delivers a hauntingly subtle performance. Stripped of his bandages after the prologue, he relies on his commanding voice and expressive eyes to convey a figure withered by centuries of longing. The Mummy stands out in the Universal era for its focus on atmosphere and tragedy over traditional scares. Jack Pierce's makeup remains a high watermark, specifically the grueling, shriveled transition that reportedly took 8 hours to apply. For the modern viewer, it is a hypnotic, dreamlike experience that prioritizes mood over action. It remains a definitive exploration of the past's refusal to stay buried and the terrifying lengths one will go to conquer death for love. Vampyr, 1932. Alan Gray, a student of the occult, arrives at a remote French inn where the veil between life and death feels dangerously thin. After receiving a mysterious package to be opened only upon a stranger's death, Gray is pulled into a surreal nightmare involving a shadow-stealing doctor and an ancient vampire. Unlike traditional Dracula tales, the threat here is ethereal and omnipresent, manifesting as disembodied voices and shadows that defy the laws of physics. Directed by Carl Theodor Dreyer, the film is a landmark of atmospheric horror that favors dream logic over linear plot. To achieve its ghostly aesthetic, Dreyer and cinematographer Rudolf Maté utilized a flashing technique, exposing the film to light during shooting, to create a hazy, translucent wash over every frame. This visual style, paired with groundbreaking subjective angles, notably a sequence shot from inside a coffin, makes the film feel like a waking trance. Vampyr remains a purely sensorial experience, stripping away the theatricality of the early sound era. Because the cast was largely non-professional and spoke different languages, Dreyer kept dialogue to a minimum, relying on silent film techniques and pure mood to tell the story. It treats vampirism as a spiritual infection rather than a caped villain's curse. For the modern viewer, it remains an essential bridge between silent expressionism and the modern psychological ghost story. White Zombie, 1932. Arriving in Haiti to be married, Madeleine Short becomes the obsession of a wealthy plantation owner. To steal her, he enlists Murder Legendre, a sinister voodoo master who uses a powerful drug to transform Madeleine into a white zombie, a soulless shell under his command. Unlike modern flesh-eaters, these zombies are tragic laborers, robbed of their will and forced to work Legendra's sugar mills in a state of eternal, silent servitude. Directed by Victor Halperin, the film stars Bela Lugosi in one of his most commanding roles. His Legendra is a mesmerizing villain, defined by piercing stares and theatrical menace. The production leans heavily into German expressionism, utilizing high-contrast lighting and fog to create a world between dream and nightmare. To save on costs, the independent production famously recycled sets from Universal's Dracula, helping create a lush, high-budget look on a shoestring budget. As the first feature-length zombie film, White Zombie is an essential document that grounds the monster in folkloric roots of slavery and lost autonomy. It eschews gore for a hypnotic dread, focusing on the horror of a body that outlives its soul. For the modern viewer, it remains a hauntingly beautiful example of early independent horror, proving that the genre's power often lies in the chilling stillness of its monsters. The Invisible Man, 1933. This fast-paced science fiction horror film centers on a scientist who discovers a way to become unseen, then loses control of his behavior. Directed by James Whale and based on the H.G. Wells novel, the story follows the increasingly unstable experiments of Jack Griffin. Claude Rains provides the voice and performance behind the bandaged disguise for most of the film. The visual effects used to create the illusion of invisibility were groundbreaking for the time. Floating objects, moving clothing, and empty space interactions still hold up surprisingly well. The tone mixes menace with dark humor and rapid pacing. It stands apart from slower gothic entries in the early monster cycle. The film remains one of the most technically impressive horror productions of the 1930s. The Black Cat, 1934. Following a bus accident in the Hungarian mountains, a honeymooning couple is forced to seek shelter in the home of Hjalmar Polsig, a world-renowned architect. They are joined by Dr. Vitus Verdegast, a man seeking vengeance against Polsig for betraying him during the Great War. As a storm rages outside, the house becomes a psychological battlefield. Verdegast discovers that Polsig's stunning home is built over the ruins of a massacre, and that his host is the leader of a satanic cult planning a human sacrifice. Directed by Edgar G. Ulmer, The Black Cat is a radical departure from traditional Gothic horror. Instead of a crumbling castle, the setting is a cold, geometric Art Deco mansion, a house of glass that symbolizes the sterile, modern face of evil. The film is defined by its relentless, near-constant musical score, which was revolutionary for 1934. Boris Karloff is chilling as the necrophiliac Polsig, while Bela Lugosi delivers a rare, sympathetic performance as the tortured Verdegast, creating a dual-lead dynamic of unmatched intensity. It eschews supernatural monsters in favor of human depravity, featuring themes of Satanism and betrayal that pushed the boundaries of the pre-code era. For the modern viewer, it is a stylish, nihilistic masterpiece that prioritizes psychological warfare over jump scares. It remains the definitive pairing of Karloff and Lugosi, anchored in a cold architectural dread that hasn't aged a day. Bride of Frankenstein, 1935. This follow-up to Frankenstein expands the story with a darker tone and a stronger sense of personality and style. Directed by James Whale, the film continues the creature's journey after surviving the events of the first film. Boris Karloff returns, giving the monster more emotional range and pathos. The story introduces a new scientist, who pressures the original creator into building a companion for the creature. The laboratory sequences are larger and more elaborate, and the film blends horror with moments of strange humor and satire. The bride herself appears briefly, but became one of horror's most recognizable images. The tall white hair streaked with lightning-like patterns is instantly identifiable. Many fans and critics consider this sequel stronger and more expressive than the original. The Wolfman, 1941. This film helped establish the werewolf as a tragic central figure in modern horror cinema. Directed by George Wagner, it stars Lon Chaney Jr. as Larry Talbot, a man who is bitten and cursed to transform under the full moon. The story emphasizes inevitability and sorrow rather than power fantasy. Makeup artist Jack Pierce designed the layered transformation look that defined screen werewolves for years. The poem about the wolf and the full moon originates here and became part of genre folklore. Foggy forests and night settings give the film a moody, fatalistic atmosphere. Unlike many monsters of the era, the main character knows and fears what he is becoming. That emotional angle is a major reason the film endured. Cat People, 1942. This low-budget horror film is remembered for how effectively it creates fear through suggestion instead of spectacle. Directed by Jacques Tourneur and produced by Val Lewton, the story follows a woman who believes she will transform into a deadly creature if she gives in to strong emotion. Much of the tension comes from shadows, sound design, and what is left unseen. One famous suspense sequence involving footsteps and a sudden noise became a textbook example of misdirection. The film avoids showing a full monster form and instead lets the audience imagine the threat. Its restrained style proved that atmosphere could be more powerful than effects. The approach influenced decades of psychological horror filmmaking, remains one of the most studied mood-driven horror films of the 1940s. I Walked with a Zombie, 1943. This atmospheric horror drama reworks classic Gothic themes through a Caribbean setting and a more introspective tone. Directed by Jacques Tourneur and produced by Val Lewton, the story follows a nurse who travels to a plantation to care for a woman in a strange, trance-like state. Local beliefs and ritual practices create uncertainty about whether the cause is medical or supernatural. The film focuses on mood, music, and nighttime imagery rather than overt shocks. Long walking sequences and shadowy landscapes give it a dreamlike quality. It draws loose inspiration from Jane Eyre, but reshapes the material into supernatural territory. The ambiguity is central to its lasting impact. It stands as one of Lewton's most respected horror productions. The Spiral Staircase, 1946. This suspense thriller blends Gothic atmosphere with serial killer tension inside a shadow-filled mansion. Directed by Robert Siodmak, the story centers on a mute woman who becomes a target while working in a large country house. A killer is stalking women with perceived weaknesses, creating constant threat within confined spaces. The film uses point-of-view shots and moving camera work to heighten unease. Stormy weather and candlelit interiors add to the claustrophobic mood. Sound design plays an important role, especially since the main character cannot call for help. The combination of vulnerability and enclosed setting builds steady suspense. It stands as a strong bridge between Gothic horror and noir technique. Creature from the Black Lagoon, 1954. During a scientific expedition into the remote depths of the Amazon, a group of researchers discovers a living fossil, a prehistoric amphibious humanoid known as the Gill Man. The creature, sensing an intrusion into its isolated, untouched ecosystem, begins stalking the team, eventually focusing its fixation on Kay Lawrence, the girlfriend of the team's lead ichthyologist. It is a quintessential creature feature, defined by the tension between human curiosity and the terrifying reality of the natural world. Director Jack Arnold expertly handles the pacing, moving from the scientific wonder of the exploration to the claustrophobic dread of the underwater sequences. Originally shot and exhibited in 3D, the film utilizes the depth of the lagoon to create a constant sense of looming threat. The Gill Man remains one of cinema's most iconic monster designs, created by the visionary Millicent Patrick, perfectly balancing animalistic brutality with a strange, tragic empathy. The performance was a dual effort. Riku Browning portrayed the creature in its fluid underwater scenes, while Ben Chapman donned the suit for the terrestrial encounters. For the modern viewer, this serves as the final great masterpiece of the classic Universal monster era. It effectively strips away the Gothic European sensibilities of earlier decades in favor of a more grounded, atomic age, scientific adventure. While it follows a straightforward Beauty and the Beast archetype, the execution is flawless, offering a perfect blend of high-stakes suspense and creature feature spectacle that has influenced generations of monster movies to come. Gojira, 1954. Ishiro Honda's Gojira is a stark, somber masterpiece that transcends the monster movie genre to stand as a profound reflection on the horrors of nuclear devastation. Set in a Japan still reeling from the scars of World War II and released just months after the real-life Lucky Dragon No. 5 radiation tragedy, the film introduces the titular beast not as a character, but as a living manifestation of the hydrogen bomb. When Gojira rises from the depths to lay waste to Tokyo, the destruction is framed with a documentary-like clinical focus, emphasizing the civilian cost and the paralyzing helplessness of a nation facing a nuclear ghost. The production is defined by its grim, grounded atmosphere. Shot in high-contrast black and white, Akira Ifukube's percussive, mournful score underscores the tragedy rather than the spectacle. The practical effects utilize Haruo Nakajima's heavy suitmation, presented with a sense of scale and dread that makes the creature's presence feel genuinely cataclysmic. It is a film that refuses to offer easy answers, ending on a note of deep moral uncertainty regarding the oxygen destroyer, the terrifying weapon used to stop the monster. For the modern viewer, the film serves as a powerful historical document of post-war anxiety. It is the definitive nuclear horror story, trading camp for a biting, intelligent critique of humanity's hubris. Dr. Serizawa's internal struggle, fearing that his scientific discovery will inevitably be turned into a tool of war, mirrors the real-world dilemma of nuclear proliferation. It remains an essential, haunting experience that reminds us that the true monster in the film is not the beast, but the fallout of human innovation. Them, 1954. In the New Mexico desert, police discover a series of inexplicable disappearances and a traumatized child. Investigations by scientists reveal a terrifying reality. Atomic tests have caused common ants to mutate into colossal man-eating giants. As the colony threatens to establish a new nest in the Los Angeles sewer system, the military is mobilized for a desperate subterranean war against a species that now views humanity as a food source. Directed by Gordon Douglas, Them is the peak of the 1950s big bug subgenre. The film treats its premise with the gravity of a police procedural, withholding the monsters during the first act to build genuine mystery. When the creatures appear, the practical effects, including full-scale animatronics, create a visceral presence. The film's most unsettling feature is its sound design. The high-pitched chirp of the ants was actually a recording of bird-voiced tree frogs, layered and sped up to create a signature of impending doom. Beyond the spectacle, the film is a potent reflection of atomic-age anxiety, portraying nature as something irrevocably altered by nuclear testing. The climactic battle in the sewers blends documentary-style realism with claustrophobic tension, influencing decades of creature feature cinematography. It remains an essential sci-fi classic, proving that fantastic concepts are most effective when grounded in a serious human-centric narrative. Les Diaboliques, 1955. In this French masterpiece, the abused wife and the mistress of a sadistic boarding school headmaster conspire to murder him. Their plan seems perfectly executed until the body mysteriously vanishes from the school's swimming pool. What follows is a descent into psychological disintegration, as the two women are terrorized by the growing suspicion that their victim is still alive, stalking the corridors of the school to exact revenge. Director Henri-Georges Clouzot, who famously beat Alfred Hitchcock to the film rights by a matter of hours, constructs a masterclass in tension. The film is famously devoid of a musical score, opting for raw psychological dread over cinematic cues. It is claustrophobic and meticulously paced, using the dreary, run-down setting of the school to mirror the crumbling mental states of the protagonists. Every creak of the floorboards and every shifting shadow feels heavy with menace, creating an atmosphere of inescapable paranoia. The film is legendary for its shocking climax, a twist so effective that it featured the first-ever spoiler disclaimer, begging audiences not to reveal the secret to their friends. It serves as a primary precursor to the modern psychological thriller, significantly influencing the structure of Hitchcock's Psycho. For the modern viewer, Les Diaboliques remains a flawless example of narrative misdirection, proving that the most terrifying haunts are often the ones created by our own guilt and fear. The Night of the Hunter, 1955. In this haunting Southern Gothic fable, preacher Harry Powell travels the countryside with love and hate tattooed on his knuckles, hiding a predatory soul behind religious fervor. After learning of a hidden fortune from a condemned cellmate, Powell tracks down the man's widow and 2 children. He marries the mother to find the cash, eventually forcing the children to flee down the Ohio River, with the hunter relentlessly following their trail. Charles Laughton's only directorial effort is a visual masterpiece, blending German expressionism with American folk horror. Robert Mitchum delivers a career-defining performance as Powell, a villain both charismatic and demonic. The film's logic is dreamlike and lyrical, utilizing sharp angles and surreal silhouettes to tell the story through the eyes of the children. Laughton famously used forced perspective sets and silent-era lighting techniques to eschew 1950s realism in favor of a stark, binary struggle between evil and innocence. The river sequence stands as one of cinema's most beautiful passages, portraying nature as a witness to the nightmare. Lillian Gish appears in the final act as a matriarch, providing a spiritual counterpoint to Powell's twisted theology. While a failure upon release that discouraged Laughton from directing again, the film is now recognized as a staggering achievement in atmosphere. It remains a grim fairy tale, where the monsters are real and wear the clothes of the righteous. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956. In the quiet town of Santa Mira, Dr. Miles Bennell begins receiving reports of a strange phenomenon. Citizens claim their loved ones are no longer themselves, despite appearing physically identical. Miles soon discovers a terrifying extraterrestrial invasion, where giant seed pods grow emotionless duplicates of humans, replacing the originals while they sleep. As the town is systematically overtaken, Miles finds himself in a desperate race to escape and warn the world before humanity is quietly extinguished. Directed by Don Siegel, this quintessential 1950s thriller is a masterclass in escalating paranoia. Shot in high-contrast black and white, the film utilizes the mundane setting of small-town America to heighten the sense of unease. The horror lies not in violence, but in the total loss of identity and the chilling apathy of the pod people. Kevin McCarthy's frantic performance captures the transition from professional skepticism to breathless terror, culminating in a fourth-wall-breaking finale that, despite studio-mandated framing, remains one of the most chilling endings in cinema. The film serves as a potent metaphor for its era, often interpreted as a commentary on the creeping conformity of the 1950s or the perceived threats of the Cold War. Regardless of the political lens, its core theme, the erosion of human emotion, remains universal. By prioritizing psychological isolation over creature effects, Invasion of the Body Snatchers cemented itself as a definitive masterpiece of Cold War anxiety and a foundational text for the science fiction horror genre. House on Haunted Hill, 1959. Eccentric millionaire Frederick Loren invites 5 strangers to a party at a notorious mansion, offering each $10,000 if they can survive a single night locked inside. As the heavy steel doors close, the guests and Loren's cynical wife, Annabelle, are subjected to a series of macabre pranks and genuine scares. The night quickly dissolves into a web of suspicion, where the true threat isn't just the ghosts rumored to haunt the halls, but the murderous domestic warfare between the hosts themselves. Directed by the legendary showman William Castle, the film is a masterclass in funhouse horror. Castle famously released it with Emergo, a gimmick featuring a plastic skeleton that flew over the audience's heads in theaters. The film's visual identity is defined by the exterior use of Frank Lloyd Wright's Ennis House, providing a cold, geometric backdrop to the chaos within. Vincent Price delivers a career-defining performance as Loren, balancing a suave exterior with a sharp, menacing wit that makes him one of cinema's most delightful anti-heroes. House on Haunted Hill remains a cornerstone of the old dark house subgenre, blending gothic atmosphere with a clever, twist-filled script. While it leans into the campier side of 50s horror, its stark cinematography and creative practical effects provide several genuine chills, most notably the terrifying gliding apparition of the caretaker's wife. For the modern viewer, it is a quintessential piece of horror history that prioritizes entertainment and irony, standing as a testament to Castle's ability to turn a movie-going experience into a communal event. Black Sunday, 1960. Few films announced the arrival of a new horror master as boldly as Black Sunday. Mario Bava's directorial debut tells the story of Princess Asavajda, a witch condemned to death who returned centuries later to take revenge on the descendants of those who executed her. Barbara Steele, in a career-defining dual role, embodies both the vengeful witch and her innocent relative, cementing her as one of horror's greatest icons. What makes Black Sunday unforgettable is its style. Bava's mastery of black and white cinematography creates images that feel carved in shadow, swirling fog, ruined castles, and Steele's wide, hypnotic eyes. The opening sequence alone, with the spiked death mask hammered onto Ace's face, set a new standard for gothic horror and pushed the limits of on-screen violence for its time. Though banned in several countries and heavily censored in others, the film's reputation only grew. Critics hailed its artistry, fans praised its brutality, and its influence can be seen everywhere, from Hammer's Gothic cycle to American International Pictures' rise in the 1960s. Black Sunday stands at the crossroads of old-world Gothic tradition and modern cinematic horror. It remains one of the most stylish, atmospheric, and important genre films of the decade. A film that not only launched Barbara Steele's reign as a horror queen, but also Mario Bava's legacy as one of the great architects of Italian horror. Eyes Without a Face, 1960. Georges Franju's Eyes Without a Face is one of the most haunting films of its era, a lyrical nightmare that combines beauty, tragedy, and horror in equal measure. The story follows Dr. Génessier, played by Pierre Brasseur, a brilliant but obsessed surgeon determined to restore the face of his disfigured daughter, Christiane. Hidden behind a porcelain mask, Christiane drifts through the family's mansion like a ghost, her delicate presence both heartbreaking and eerie. What makes the film unforgettable is the way it balances dreamlike poetry with moments of shocking brutality. The surgical sequences, graphic for their time, were notorious, leaving audiences unsettled across Europe. Yet these moments are framed within a film that otherwise feels elegant and melancholic, as though horror were unfolding inside a tragic fairy tale. Edith Scobb's performance as Christiane is central. Barely speaking a word, she conveys immense sorrow and fragile humanity through her eyes and movement. Her masked figure has since become one of the most iconic images in world cinema, influencing filmmakers from Jesus Franco to John Carpenter. Though controversial in its release, Eyes Without a Face is now celebrated as a masterpiece of art horror. It's a reminder that horror can be graceful and horrifying all at once. A film that lingers not just for its shocks, but for its beauty. Psycho, 1960. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho isn't just a horror classic, it's one of the most important films in the history of cinema. With this single movie, Hitchcock shattered audience expectations, reinvented the thriller, and helped define modern horror as we know it. Released in 1960, it arrived at the dawn of a new decade, one that would see the genre grow darker, bolder, and more psychological. Psycho was the spark that lit that fire. The film begins deceptively as a crime story. Marion Crane, played by Janet Leigh, is a secretary who impulsively steals $40,000 and goes on the run. Exhausted, she checks into the Bates Motel, where she encounters the shy and soft-spoken proprietor, Norman Bates. Anthony Perkins' performance is unforgettable, boyish charm masking a tortured soul. What follows is a film that constantly upends expectations, most famously in the shocking shower sequence that left audiences stunned and terrified. Janet Leigh's turn as Marion was groundbreaking, not only for her intensity, but also because Hitchcock kills off his apparent star halfway through the film, a move almost unthinkable at the time. Perkins delivers a masterclass in nuance, creating a character who is both sympathetic and deeply unsettling. Vera Miles and John Gavin add grit as Marion's sister and boyfriend, desperate to uncover what happened, while Martin Balsam's detective provides one of the film's most suspenseful moments. Hitchcock's craft is at its peak here. Working with a modest budget, he used stark black-and-white cinematography, rapid editing, and Bernard Herrmann's iconic, shrieking string score to create an atmosphere of unrelenting tension. The shower scene alone, with its 70 camera setups and razor-sharp cuts, changed the language of film editing forever. Yet beyond technique, Hitchcock tapped into primal fears: guilt, voyeurism, and the terror of hidden secrets lurking beneath ordinary lives. Psycho also broke barriers in how films were released and consumed. Hitchcock insisted that theaters not allow late admissions, forcing audiences to experience the story from the beginning. This bold marketing strategy turned Psycho into an event, one that drew massive crowds and helped make it one of the most profitable films of its era. Psycho earns its place not just for its scares, but for its enduring influence. It paved the way for the slasher genre, inspired generations of filmmakers, and proved that horror could be both artistically daring and commercially successful. More than 6 decades later, the shadow of the Bates Motel still looms large. And as Norman Bates once said, "We all go a little mad sometimes." Village of the Damned, 1960. In the English village of Midwich, every living creature falls into a mysterious, hours-long sleep. Months later, every woman of childbearing age is pregnant. These children develop at an unnatural rate, possessing eerie blonde hair and a terrifying collective intelligence. As they grow, they demonstrate lethal telepathic abilities, using their minds to enslave the village and lethally punish anyone who threatens their cold, alien agenda. Directed by Wolf Rilla and adapted from John Wyndham's The Midwich Cuckoos, the film is a chilling exercise in domestic dread. It subverts the innocence of childhood trope, transforming the children into an emotionless, unstoppable force. To achieve their signature psychic stare, the filmmakers used a negative matte overlay to make their pupils glow with an unnatural, piercing light. George Sanders provides a grounded perspective as a father whose paternal love becomes a dangerous blind spot to a global threat. The film serves as a quintessential Cold War allegory, reflecting fears of ideological brainwashing and the enemy within. Its clinical black-and-white cinematography emphasizes the contrast between the cozy British village and the sterile, predatory nature of the children. With a lean runtime and a legendary ticking clock climax, it remains a landmark of British sci-fi horror. It proves that the most unnerving monsters are the ones that sit at the dinner table and stare back with an unblinking alien calm. The Innocents, 1961, adapted from Henry James's The Turn of the Screw, this film is the definitive haunted house psychological thriller. A governess hired to care for 2 orphans at the isolated Bly estate soon believes the children are possessed by the spirits of former employees. As she uncovers the house's dark history, the line between her mounting hysteria and a tangible supernatural threat dissolves, leaving the viewer to question what is truly haunting the grounds. Director Jack Clayton, working from a screenplay co-written by Truman Capote, crafts a masterclass in ambiguity. The film utilizes Freddie Francis's stunning, high-contrast CinemaScope cinematography, using custom filters to blur the edges of the frame and trap the viewer in the governess's subjective, unstable viewpoint. This visual dread is heightened by a pioneering avant-garde sound design that favors eerie, electronic-processed whispers over traditional orchestral stings. Deborah Kerr's performance as the repressed governess provides a grounding human element to the encroaching paranoia. The Innocents remains a high art benchmark for Gothic horror, rewarding close attention to subtle details that suggest the haunting may be a projection of the protagonist's psyche. It proves that the unseen, manifested here through shadows and psychological tension, is far more terrifying than any direct monster. Carnival of Souls, 1962. Few films embody the term cult classic as perfectly as Carnival of Souls. Released in 1962 and made on a shoestring budget by industrial filmmaker Herc Harvey, it tells the story of Mary Henry, a young woman who survives a car accident only to find herself haunted by strange visions and pulled toward an abandoned carnival. Candice Hilligoss stars as Mary, and her performance captures both strength and alienation. She's never quite at ease in the world around her. Her detached presence makes it unclear whether she's really alive or simply drifting in some strange limbo. That ambiguity gives the film its haunting power. The imagery in Carnival of Souls is unforgettable. The pale-faced man who stalks Mary appears without warning, staring through windows and emerging from the shadows. The desolate carnival itself, with its echoing dance halls and broken rides, becomes a perfect metaphor for death. Empty, silent, yet filled with echoes of life. Harvey's background in industrial films shows in the way he frames locations, giving ordinary spaces a stark, otherworldly quality. The film's organ-heavy score, often dissonant and overwhelming, adds to the surreal atmosphere. Combined with its low-budget grit, it feels more like a nightmare than a traditional narrative, closer to the dream logic of later directors like David Lynch than to the polished studio horror of its time. Ignored on release and dismissed as an oddity, Carnival of Souls grew in reputation thanks to late-night TV broadcasts and eventually the VHS era. It remains one of the most influential independent horror films ever made, a ghost story, a character study, and a surreal journey into the borderland between life and death. The Haunting, 1963. Robert Wise's The Haunting is often hailed as the definitive haunted house movie, not because of what it shows, but because of what it refuses to show. Adapted from Shirley Jackson's classic novel The Haunting of Hill House, it follows a group of people invited to stay in a sprawling, cursed mansion to study its supposed supernatural activity. But as the walls groan and doors buckle, the real horror comes from the fragility of the human mind. Julie Harris delivers one of her greatest performances as Eleanor, a lonely, deeply vulnerable woman who joins the experiment in search of belonging. Harris plays her with such raw intensity that Eleanor's descent feels both heartbreaking and terrifying. Claire Bloom adds complexity as Theo, Eleanor's confident and mysterious counterpart, while Richard Johnson anchors the story as Dr. Markway, the investigator leading the study. Wise, who had cut his teeth as an editor on Citizen Kane and as a director of films like West Side Story, brings technical brilliance to the material. Shooting in black and white cinemascope, he uses extreme angles, distorted lenses, and experimental sound design to make Hill House feel alive. Doors breathe, walls stretch, and thunderous banging fills the halls. Yet the monsters remain unseen, leaving the audience to imagine what Eleanor believes is closing in around her. At a time when horror often leaned on creatures and gore, Wise created something terrifying out of silence, shadows, and suggestion. It's a film that continues to influence everything from modern ghost stories to psychological thrillers. Hill House isn't just haunted, it consumes the fears and desires of those inside, leaving us with one of the most chilling depictions of loneliness and madness ever captured on film. Onibaba, 1964. The setting does half the work, a vast reed marsh that feels like both hunting ground and prison. Movement through the grass becomes suspense in itself. In medieval wartime Japan, two women survive by ambushing lost samurai and selling their armor and weapons. Their brutal routine is threatened when a neighbor returns from war and begins a secret affair with the younger woman. Jealousy and fear of abandonment push the older woman toward deception and terror, centered on a demon mask used to control and frighten. Violence is sudden and physical. Bodies vanish into pits. Attacks happen at close range, and survival feels animalistic. The mask becomes the film's most disturbing image through tactile, practical detail. Directed by Kaneto Shindo, the performances are raw and physical, driven by need, desire, and resentment rather than spectacle. A stark blend of historical drama and horror built on survival, sexuality, and envy. Repulsion, 1965. Roman Polanski's Repulsion isn't just a horror film, it's one of the most chilling portraits of psychological breakdown ever put on screen. Released in 1965, it was Polanski's first English-language feature, and it remains one of his most unnerving works. At the center is Catherine Deneuve as Carol, a young Belgian woman living in London with her sister. When the sister leaves on holiday, Carol is left alone in their apartment, and her fragile state of mind quickly unravels. What begins as subtle unease builds into full paranoia, with Carol hallucinating cracks splitting through the walls, strange noises echoing in the silence, and spectral hands reaching from the shadows to grab her. Deneuve delivers a performance that is both restrained and devastating. With very little dialogue, she conveys Carol's descent entirely through her body language and expressions, shifting from quiet, detached beauty to a figure of absolute terror. It's the kind of role that became career-defining, and she anchors the film with a haunting sense of vulnerability. Polanski amplifies the tension with innovative camera work and sound design. Everyday spaces become warped and threatening, the apartment itself almost alive, reflecting Carol's disintegrating mind. Simple shots of rotting food or unwashed dishes become grotesque, and the claustrophobic setting traps both Carol and the audience inside her nightmare. Upon release, Repulsion shocked audiences with its bold treatment of sexual repression, isolation, and madness. Some critics were horrified by its subject matter, but it has since been recognized as a landmark of psychological horror. It shows that true terror doesn't always come from monsters or killers. Spider Baby, or The Maddest Story Ever Told, 1967. Jack Hill's offbeat gothic horror comedy follows the Mary family, who suffer from Mary syndrome, a fictional condition that causes them to regress mentally and physically as they grow older. Lon Chaney Jr. plays their caretaker, Bruno, who protects the three remaining Mary children in a decaying mansion while hiding the severity of their condition from outsiders. When distant relatives arrive to claim the estate, their curiosity triggers a chain of dangerous encounters. The film balances unsettling atmosphere with dark humor, never undermining either. The Mary children, especially Virginia, who imagines herself a spider and stalks intruders with blades, come across as both vulnerable and unpredictable. Jill Banner's performance as Virginia is strikingly memorable, and Beverly Washburn and Sid Haig also contribute to the family's eerie dynamic. Chaney delivers one of his strongest late-career roles, portraying Bruno as a man who loves the children, yet knows he's protecting something he no longer fully understands. The opening theme song, sung by Chaney himself, sets a quirky but ominous tone. Shot in black and white, on a tight budget, the film uses its limited setting to great effect, turning the mansion into a character of its own. Due to distribution problems, Spider Baby remained obscure for years, but later festival screenings and home video releases helped it earn a dedicated cult following. It stands as one of the most inventive American Gothic films of the era. Night of the Living Dead, 1968. George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead didn't just terrify audiences in 1968. It reshaped the entire landscape of horror cinema. Shot on a shoestring budget in rural Pennsylvania, this black and white nightmare introduced the modern zombie to the world, blending raw social commentary with relentless dread. What began as a small independent project became a cultural earthquake that still shakes the genre decades later. The story unfolds with chilling simplicity. A brother and sister visiting a cemetery are suddenly attacked by strange, shambling figures. Barbara, the sister, flees to a nearby farmhouse, where she and a handful of strangers barricade themselves inside. As night falls, the house becomes a fortress under siege, with the group torn apart not only by the horde outside, but by fear, distrust, and clashing personalities within. Dwayne Jones, as Ben, delivers a groundbreaking performance. One of the first times a black actor led a horror film without his race being explicitly addressed, making his quiet strength and intelligence all the more striking. Judith Odia's Barbara embodies shock and despair, while Carl Hardman's Harry Cooper adds combustible tension as a man whose selfishness threatens the fragile unity of the group. Romero wrings suspense from every creaking floorboard and shadowed window, balancing moments of silence with sudden shocking bursts of violence. Beyond the scares, Night of the Living Dead captured the turbulence of its time. The film's bleak tone and devastating ending mirrored the anxieties of a world on edge. Its influence cannot be overstated. The film birthed the zombie genre as we know it, inspiring countless sequels, remakes, and imitators. Yet no amount of gore or spectacle in later films has quite matched the stark, claustrophobic terror of Romero's original. With its The Cremator, 1969. In the shadow of the impending Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia, Karel Kopfer-Kingel is a fastidious worker at a Prague crematorium. He views his grim profession as a holy mission, obsessed with a distorted interpretation of Tibetan mysticism, the idea that incinerating the body liberates the soul from earthly suffering. As he is lured into the Nazi party by a manipulative friend, Karel's latent madness blooms. He begins to see his work, and his own family, through the lens of a deranged, purifying ideology, transforming from a quirky bourgeois father into a cold-blooded architect of death. Directed by Juraj Hertz, this masterpiece of the Czechoslovak New Wave is a pitch-black psychological horror. The film is defined by its disorienting visual style, utilizing extreme wide-angle lenses and a unique form of associative editing, where scenes bleed into one another across time and space to mirror Karel's fractured psyche. Rudolf Hrushinsky delivers an unforgettable performance, imbuing Karel with a soft-spoken, polite veneer that makes his homicidal turn all the more terrifying. The Cremator is a profound and disturbing allegory for how easily the banality of everyday life can be co-opted by totalitarian evil. Released briefly in 1969, before being vaulted by the authorities for 20 years, it blends macabre humor with a chillingly accurate portrayal of radicalization. It suggests that the most dangerous monsters are those who believe they are performing a compassionate service for humanity. It remains a visually stunning and deeply uncomfortable experience, standing as one of the most unique satires of the 20th century. Demons, 1971. Toshio Matsumoto's Demons is Japanese period horror as hallucinogenic nightmare, a film that uses the framework of samurai-era tragedy to explore obsession, madness, and the disintegration of identity. A woman's affair with a younger man spirals into violence when her samurai husband discovers the betrayal. What follows isn't straightforward revenge, but a descent into psychological horror where reality fragments, time becomes unstable, and the boundaries between past trauma and present collapse entirely. Matsumoto employs avant-garde techniques that shatter traditional narrative. Split screens, overlapping timelines, distorted imagery, and sound design that assaults rather than guides. The film operates like a fever dream, where the same events replay with variations, each iteration revealing new layers of psychological damage. Katsuo Nakamura plays the lover with increasing desperation as he realizes he's trapped in a cycle he can't escape. The period setting becomes increasingly claustrophobic as Matsumoto's experimental approach transforms historical drama into something nightmarish. The violence, when it erupts, is sudden and disturbing, but the true horror comes from the relentless psychological unraveling. The film's treatment of female desire and rage anticipates later explorations of repression and transgression in Japanese horror. Demons never found wide distribution outside Japan and remains one of the more challenging entries in early 70s international horror. It's art cinema using horror framework to explore extreme psychological states, demanding patience and willingness to surrender to its fragmented, non-linear approach. For viewers seeking conventional scares, it's baffling. For those open to experimental horror, it's mesmerizing. Eraserhead, 1977. This surreal cult horror film presents anxiety, isolation, and parenthood through stark, black and white industrial imagery. Written and directed by David Lynch, the story follows Henry Spencer, a quiet man living in a decaying urban landscape who becomes responsible for a strange, fragile infant. The film unfolds more like a nightmare than a traditional narrative. Sound design plays a major role, with mechanical drones and ambient noise creating constant unease. Jack Nance's restrained performance keeps the character grounded while the world around him becomes increasingly abstract. Many scenes function as symbolic visions rather than literal events, which has fueled decades of interpretation. Made over several years on a limited budget, the film became a midnight movie staple through word of mouth. Its blend of body horror, surrealism, and dark humor defined Lynch's early style, It remains one of the most recognizable experimental horror films ever produced. Begotten, 1989. In a remote, empty landscape, a series of symbolic events unfold like fragments of an ancient myth. Characters move slowly through desolate fields and shadowy structures, acting out rituals that seem older than language. The narrative isn't explained directly. Instead, viewers piece together meaning through gestures, movement, and visual metaphor. The result feels like witnessing a forgotten legend rather than a traditional story. Director Elias Merhige creates a one-of-a-kind visual experience, using a heavily processed, high-contrast style that makes the images look worn and timeless. Grain, scratches, and flickering light give the film the quality of a found artifact. There is no spoken dialogue, only ambient sound and rhythm, which intensify the sense of isolation. The film's strength lies in its commitment to abstraction. Every action is deliberate, every image arranged to evoke emotion or suggest a larger cosmic cycle. As the characters move through barren forests and quiet ruins, the film seems to explore creation, destruction, and renewal on a symbolic level rather than a literal one. Because it avoids traditional structure, it inspires strong reactions. Some see it as an avant-garde meditation on mythology. Others view it as a visual endurance test. But its influence is undeniable. Few films have achieved such a distinctive atmosphere or left such a lasting impression on experimental cinema. Tetsuo, the Iron Man, 1989. A man finds his body changing in ways he can't control after a strange encounter with a metal-obsessed recluse. What begins as a small, inexplicable injury grows into something far more overwhelming as pieces of metal seem to fuse with him, transforming his skin, movements, and sense of identity. The world around him becomes louder, sharper, and more chaotic, as if the city itself is pushing him into a new form. Shinya Tsukamoto shoots the film with relentless energy, using handheld cameras, rapid editing, and industrial soundscapes to create a sense of mounting pressure. Black and white cinematography gives the imagery a gritty texture, making every alleyway, factory wall, and flickering light feel alive. The film moves at a breakneck pace, cutting between surreal visions and frantic chases that blur the line between nightmare and reality. Under the noise and intensity is a story about how people disconnect from their surroundings and from each other. As the main character changes, he becomes a reflection of the city's machinery, caught between fear of transformation and acceptance of his new identity. Despite its short runtime, the film leaves a lasting impact. It's a rare example of pure cinematic expression, where visuals and sound carry as much meaning as the story. Over time, it has become a landmark of underground film, influencing directors worldwide with its bold style and raw imagination. Man Bites Dog, 1992. This Belgian mockumentary presents crime through the lens of a film crew following a serial killer, blending dark humor with deliberate discomfort. Directed by Rémi Belvaux, André Bonzel, and Benoit Poelvoorde, the movie follows the killer as he explains his methods and philosophy directly to the camera. The crew gradually shifts from observers to participants. Shot in black and white with a handheld style, the film mimics documentary realism to make its satire more pointed. Benoit Poelvoorde plays the killer with a mix of charm and arrogance that keeps scenes unpredictable. The tone intentionally shifts from absurd to disturbing as boundaries erode. The film became a major cult title for its format and confrontational approach. It is often cited as an early and extreme example of mockumentary crime horror. Its reputation rests on how it challenges viewer comfort and complicity rather than delivering conventional thrills. Nadja, 1994. The daughter of a recently deceased vampire drifts through the nocturnal landscape of downtown New York, searching for meaning in an immortal existence that feels increasingly hollow as she reconnects with her twin brother and becomes entangled with a married couple. Old bloodlines and new desires collide in ways that blur the line between predator and prey. Directed by Michael Almereyda, and produced by David Lynch, Nadja reinvents vampire cinema as dreamy black-and-white art house poetry. Shot partially on Pixel Vision, a toy Fisher-Price camera that gives certain sequences a ghostly degraded quality, the film feels like it's been unearthed from some forgotten corner of the early cinema vaults, then filtered through a downtown New York sensibility that's equal parts no-wave and gothic romance. Alina Lovenson plays Nadja with magnetic detachment, moving through the film like someone perpetually caught between worlds. Peter Fonda shows up as Van Helsing, reimagined here as a weary, bourbon-soaked vampire hunter who seems just as tired of the chase as his quarry. The supporting cast includes Martin Donovan, Galaxy Craze, and a brief appearance by Jared Harris, all operating in a register that feels more existential than horrific. The film trades jump scares for hypnotic atmosphere, long takes, disorienting edits, and a jazz-inflected score that sounds like it's playing from another room. Almereyda treats vampirism as a metaphor for alienation and obsession rather than monstrosity, giving the whole thing a melancholic weight that lingers. It's vampire cinema for the indie crowd. Moody, elliptical, and defiantly uncommercial in the best possible way. Dead Man, 1995. This black-and-white acid western follows a quiet accountant who travels west and becomes an outlaw through a chain of violent misunderstandings. Written and directed by Jim Jarmusch, the film stars Johnny Depp as William Blake, a man mistaken for a killer and forced into flight. The journey becomes increasingly dreamlike as he moves through hostile territory. He is guided by a mysterious outsider named Nobody, played by Gary Farmer, who believes Blake has a larger spiritual purpose. The film mixes dry humor, sudden violence, and poetic dialogue with long atmospheric passages. Its pacing is deliberate and reflective, rather than action-driven. Neil Young's electric guitar score gives the film a raw, improvised sound that matches the stark visuals. Over time, it gained strong cult status for its unconventional approach to the Western genre. It stands as one of the most distinctive independent films of the 1990s. The Addiction, 1995. The Addiction is a thought-provoking horror film directed by Abel Ferrara, combining elements of philosophy and body horror within the vampire genre. The film follows Kathleen Conklin, played by Lily Taylor, a philosophy graduate student in New York City who becomes entangled in a dark and surreal journey after a fateful encounter with a mysterious woman Casanova, portrayed by Annabella Sciorra. Set against the backdrop of a gritty urban landscape, the film opens with Kathleen experiencing disturbing visions and a sense of existential dread. After being bitten by Casanova, she finds herself grappling with an insatiable thirst for human blood. This transformation serves as an allegory for addiction, exploring themes of sin, morality, and the darker aspects of human nature. With a runtime of 1 hour and 22 minutes, The Addiction uses striking black-and-white cinematography to enhance its bleak and haunting atmosphere. The film's unique visual style complements its philosophical undertones, as Kathleen's struggle reflects broader questions about existence and the human condition. Christopher Walken delivers a memorable performance as Pena, a fellow vampire who offers insights into the nature of their condition, adding depth to the narrative. The film is filled with philosophical musings, making it both intellectually stimulating and unsettling. Critically, The Addiction holds an IMDb rating of 6.5 out of 10. While some viewers may find its pacing slow or its themes heavy-handed, others appreciate its ambitious approach to horror. The film challenges conventional vampire tropes, opting instead for a more cerebral exploration of addiction and morality. As the film reaches its climax, Kathleen confronts the reality of her transformation. In a poignant final scene, she stands at the crossroads of her new existence, caught between the seductive allure of her vampiric nature and the remnants of her humanity. The screen fades to black just as she makes her choice, leaving viewers to ponder the consequences of her decision. The film closes with a haunting question echoing in the silence. Can one truly escape the darkness within, or does it become an inseparable part of us? Pi, 1998. This psychological science fiction thriller explores obsession, mathematics, and pattern recognition through a stark black and white style. Written and directed by Darren Aronofsky, the film follows a reclusive mathematician searching for a hidden numerical structure behind reality. His work attracts attention from both financial interests and religious scholars. Sean Gillette plays the lead role with increasing intensity as the character's mental state deteriorates. The camera work is tight and often handheld, creating a sense of pressure and instability. Rapid editing and harsh sound design reinforce the feeling of overload. Produced on a very small budget, the film became a breakout success on the festival circuit. Its themes of knowledge and self-destruction would continue in Aronofsky's later work. It remains one of the most recognizable indie science fiction thrillers of its decade. The Call of Cthulhu, 2005. Produced by the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society, this film is a unique cinematic experiment. A modern adaptation of Lovecraft's seminal 1928 story, filmed as a silent black-and-white feature. The narrative follows a young man settling the estate of his late great-uncle, an investigation that leads him down a rabbit hole of cult activity and mounting global dread. As accounts from a dying sailor and a haunted artist converge, the terrifying reality of the Great Old One, Cthulhu, begins to surface from the sunken city of Relaya. Directed by Andrew Lehman, the film utilizes mythoscope, a blend of modern digital tools and vintage techniques like variable frame rates, to replicate the authentic look of 1920s cinema. By using expressionistic sets, forced perspective, and stop-motion animation that pays homage to Willis O'Brien, the filmmakers capture unfilmable cosmic horror in a way a high-budget CGI blockbuster likely couldn't. The silent format is a stroke of genius. It mirrors the fragmented, epistolary nature of Lovecraft's text, forcing the audience to sit with the mounting atmospheric dread. The Call of Cthulhu stands as one of the most faithful Lovecraft adaptations ever made, maintaining the complex three-part structure of the original short story. It understands that the power of the mythos lies in the suggestion of scale and ancient indifferent malevolence. For the modern viewer, it is a triumph of style over budget, proving that the aesthetic of the silent era is perfectly suited to indescribable horrors. It remains a loving tribute to both early film history and the foundations of weird fiction. The Mist, Black and White Edition, 2007. Following a violent thunderstorm, an unnatural mist traps survivors inside a Maine grocery store. As otherworldly predators emerge from the fog, the real danger shifts to the social collapse within. Religious fanaticism and tribalism fracture the group, leading to a psychological breakdown more lethal than the monsters outside. While the color version is a gritty creature feature, the black and white director's choice transforms the film into a timeless existential nightmare. Director Frank Darabont originally envisioned the film in monochrome to mirror the stark photography of the Twilight Zone. This version significantly enhances the atmosphere. The mist becomes a wall of oppressive gray, and the CGI creatures, designed by genre legends including Bernie Wrightson, gain a tactile, organic weight that masks their digital origins. The high-contrast lighting emphasizes the desperation of the grocery store setting, making the harrowing, controversial ending feel like an inevitable Greek tragedy. By stripping away the color, the mist becomes a visceral study of human fragility. The monochrome palette turns gore into a dark, shocking stain, grounding the horror in reality rather than slasher artifice. This edition is the definitive way to experience Darabont's vision, bridging the gap between mid-century atomic horror and modern nihilism. It remains one of the most uncompromising and effective Stephen King adaptations ever produced. A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, 2014. This Iranian-language vampire western blends horror, romance, and graphic novel style in a minimalist black-and-white presentation. Directed by Anna Lily Amirpour, the story takes place in a fictional ghost town and follows a lonely vampire who stalks predatory men. The tone mixes menace with quiet melancholy. She crosses paths with a troubled young man, and their connection adds emotional weight to the story. The film uses long takes, sparse dialogue, and strong visual composition to build mood. Music choices and night photography give it a modern, stylized feel. Though produced independently, it gained wide attention for its genre fusion and visual confidence. Critics and audiences embraced its originality and tone. It stands as one of the most distinctive vampire films of the modern era. The Eyes of My Mother, 2016. A young girl grows up on a quiet farm, taught anatomy and care by her mother, a former surgeon. When a sudden act of violence shatters that world, the child is left to develop in near-total isolation, absorbing lessons about the body and affection without any emotional framework to balance them. Years later, as an adult, she seeks connection the only way she understands, through control, imitation, and deeply warped attempts at closeness. The film unfolds like a grim fairy tale, stripped of sentiment and explanation. Its central performance is restrained and unsettling, built on stillness rather than outbursts. The character isn't portrayed as a monster in the traditional sense, but as someone whose emotional wiring never had a chance to form normally. That quiet approach makes her actions more disturbing than any overt villainy. Shot in stark black and white, the imagery is precise and severe. Pastoral landscapes feel empty rather than peaceful, and interiors are framed to emphasize confinement and routine. Violence, when it appears, is handled with clinical detachment, often implied, sometimes brief, never sensationalized. The sound design leans heavily on silence, allowing small noises to land with disproportionate weight. The Eyes of My Mother is not an easy watch, but it's a controlled and purposeful one. It explores how isolation and trauma can distort empathy beyond repair, presenting horror as something learned rather than summoned. Bleak, intimate, and deeply unsettling, it leaves its impact through mood and implication, rather than excess. November, 2017. This Estonian folk horror film blends superstition, dark humor, and rural myth in striking black and white imagery. Directed by Rainer Sarnay, the story takes place in a village where magic, spirits, and strange mechanical creatures are treated as everyday realities. Much of the conflict centers on love, jealousy, and bargaining with supernatural forces. The film draws heavily from regional folklore, including tales of spirits and animated constructs built from farm tools and scrap. Its visuals alternate between eerie landscapes and surreal inventions. The tone shifts between grim, poetic, and oddly playful. Rather than following a conventional horror structure, it presents a chain of fables and consequences. The stylized approach and cultural specificity give it a unique identity. It has become a cult favorite among modern folk horror fans. The Lighthouse, 2019. This psychological horror drama traps two lighthouse keepers in isolation as tension and paranoia slowly build. Directed by Robert Eggers, the film stars Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson as the mismatched pair assigned to a remote post. Harsh weather and strict routine begin to break down their sanity. Shot in black and white with a narrow aspect ratio, the film emphasizes texture, shadow, and physical detail. Dialogue uses period-styled language, especially in Dafoe's character, adding to the intensity. The relationship shifts between authority struggle and mutual dependence. The film blends mythic imagery, hallucination, and psychological conflict without offering simple explanations. Both performances were widely praised for their commitment and range. It stands as one of the most acclaimed modern black and white horror films. Godzilla -1 - Color, 2024, released as a monochrome re-edit of Takashi Yamazaki's celebrated 2023 blockbuster, Godzilla -1 - Color transforms a modern spectacle into something stark, visceral, and historically haunting. The narrative remains the same. Japan must confront an unleashed atomic beast. Stripped of the color spectrum, the film feels less like a contemporary digital production and more like a harrowing, rediscovered piece of historical found footage, deeply tethered to the trauma of its era. The visual shift is profound and intentional. The monochrome palette gives the textures of Godzilla's skin a scarred, necrotic quality, while the ocean sequences possess a terrifying oily density that feels almost tactile. The destruction of Tokyo, already emotionally heavy, takes on an eerie newsreel quality that evokes the genuine pain of Japan's mid-century history. By removing the vibrant hues of the original, the film forces the audience to focus on the interplay of light and shadow, highlighting the jagged, sharp edges of the monster's silhouette against a decimated landscape. For the modern viewer, this version bridges the gap between modern blockbuster filmmaking and the aesthetic legacy of the 1954 original. The absence of color strips away the artifice, leaving only the raw, existential dread of a nation trying to rebuild, while being systematically dismantled by an unstoppable force of nature. It is a somber meditation on grief, guilt, and the resilience of the human spirit. This isn't just an aesthetic gimmick, it is a deliberate choice that transforms the experience into an urgent, necessary historical record.
Thanks for watching. If you have your own memories of these films or a hidden gem we missed, let us know in the comments below. We're building this collection together, one film at a time. And remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is somebody's favorite.